Today we are going to do the second half of lesson 2.1. And if you remember yesterday, we went through the examples and we talked about numbers that are on a number line, how we can graph them, and how a number line shows us that we can have positive and negative numbers and we can see which one is smaller and larger than the other. So today we're going to start with example 4. So this is where we're going to start today. And what we want to do is we want to find the opposite of a number. If you notice on a number line, like what we were using yesterday, okay, there are always 2 of every number on a number line except for 0. 0 does not have an opposite. It is the only number because it's neither positive nor negative. But I have a -1 and a +1, a -2 and a +2. So when they ask you for the opposite of the number, you're just going to give them whichever one they didn't have. So if they ask you for the opposite of -2, it would be +2. The opposite of +1 would be -1. Okay? So what is the opposite of 1/2? Who can tell me that? What would the opposite be? -1/2. Exactly. What's the opposite of -3? +3. What's the opposite of 2.5? -2.5. Okay? What's the opposite of 0? 0. There is no opposite to 0. That is my answer. Okay? Okay, so in example 5, we're going to go into absolute value. Now, absolute value and opposites are different, okay? Absolute value and opposites are different. Look at this statement that I've written right here. I put stars by it. I put it in red. I made all caps to this word never right here. The absolute value of a number is never negative. Anytime you are asked for an absolute value of any number at all, the absolute value is always the exact number that you have. So if I have, like, the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of -5 is also +5. Okay, so the absolute value is always a positive. It's never a negative. Okay? These bars right here mean absolute value. They are not parentheses. They are not brackets. They do not mean multiplication. They mean the absolute value. Okay? And whatever is inside of those bars is what they want you to give the absolute value of. So what is the absolute value of 1/2? +1/2. Exactly. Okay? Let's do another one. I want you to write this one down. What's the absolute value of -5? 5. Exactly. Whatever is in between these bars, we just take it and make it a positive. And that is my absolute value. Okay? Now, there is one catch to this statement right here. One catch to this statement in red. The absolute value of a number is never negative. That is a true statement. It will always be true. However, whenever you have a negative sign on the outside of the absolute value bars, no matter what, that negative sign has to go in your answer. So whenever it's on the outside, go ahead and write it in your answer because you know it's going to be in your answer. You can always count on that. Always, always, always. So if it's on the outside, okay, you have to write it in your answer. Then I just look at the absolute value here and I say, okay, I've got absolute value, so what's the absolute value of 3? 3. And you say, oh, okay, that proves that statement wrong because look, the absolute value of -3 is -3. No, the absolute value of 3 is 3. The only reason I have that negative sign there is because it was on the outside and I have to include it in the answer, okay? Okay, so the next problem. What do you see on the outside of those absolute value bars that you have to have in your answer? The negative sign, exactly. It has to be transferred over. Okay, now I just asked myself, what's the absolute value of -8? 8. So my answer is -8. Okay? Okay, example 6. Now, they've kind of flipped the table on us a little bit, all right? we were finding what the absolute value of a certain number was that is inside of the absolute value bars. But now on this problem, they're asking us, what numbers, do you hear that S there, can I plug in for X that is going to give me a positive 7 as my absolute value? Okay, so there are always two numbers that I can plug in. Okay, what number gives me an absolute value of 7? Negative 7. So I could plug in negative 7 here. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So look, that would check out because we would get the same answers. So X can equal negative 7. But what else could I plug in those absolute value bars and also get an answer of 7? 7, exactly. Okay, because the absolute value of 7 is also 7. Same answer. So I know that my answer can be negative 7 and positive 7. Okay? So we're just doing the kind of opposite of what we just did. I'm finding out what I can plug in. Now, who remembers that statement on the top of the last slide that was in red, had the word in all caps? Emily, what was the statement?
The absolute value of a number is never.
Very good. The absolute value of a number is never, ever, ever negative. Okay? So let's look right here. They're telling me the absolute value of X is negative 5. Is that possible? No. The only way it would be possible is if there was a negative sign on the outside. Do I have a negative sign on the outside? No, I don't. So guess what the answer to this is? No solution. Because there is no number at all that I could ever plug in for X that would give me an absolute value of negative 5. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? It's not possible. Okay? Now, if there was a negative sign on the outside of that, I could say, all right, I can plug in 5 and negative 5 for X, and that's what my answer is going to be. Okay? What numbers could I plug in for X that would give me a value of 3/4? Negative 3/4 and 3/4. Okay? Okay, in example 7, they want us to tell whether this statement is true or false. And if this statement is false, I have to give an example that proves it's false. Okay, so that's called a counter example. So something that would prove that that statement is false. All right, so let's read this statement. The opposite of a number is always negative. So let's plug something in and let's find that out, okay? Let's say the opposite of negative 2. What's the opposite of negative 2? Positive 2. So is that statement true or false? False. And this is my counter example right here. So I would box in this whole thing. I gave a counter example, and I know that this statement's false because I just proved it false. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. So the opposite of a number is not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. Okay, let's look at the next statement. The absolute value of a number is never negative. Okay, let's plug in a number and try. The absolute value of negative 2 is what? 2. Okay, did that prove that statement true? Yep, true. Now, you don't have to have an example for true, because you can just keep plugging in and in and in, and you'll never prove that that statement's false because it's not false. So if there's something that's true, you can just write true, but I just wanted to show you what it was talking about. So the absolute value of a number is never negative. That is not a possibility. Remember, if you say that the absolute value of a number is negative, then you've either done something wrong, or if it's asking for X, then it's a no solution problem. Okay? So that is real numbers and absolute values and graphing them on a number line.